Good morning. My name is Carmen Bill Delgado, and I will be your worship associate today. On behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington of Delaware, I would like to welcome you to our online worship service. Unitarian Universalism is a religion where you can be yourself and be accepted for who you are. Come and join a beloved group of people serving with love and compassion and fighting for justice for all. Our principles are not dogma or doctrine, but rather a guide for those of us who choose to join and participate in Unitarian Universalist communities. Our announcements for this week, we have on August the 8th, from 3 to 5 p.m., we will have the celebration of life for Scott Davidson. You can find the information for the Zoom on the e-news and or the website. Also, we don't have information yet on our service for Sam Stubblefield, but as soon as we have that information, we will make it available to you. We'll let you know either by the website, our e-news, or on the service. Today we're joined by guest minister, Reverend Dr. Neal Jones. Reverend Jones is the minister of Main Line Unitarian Church near Philadelphia. He has served 4 other congregations in North and South Carolina and Texas. He is also a clinical psychologist. A native of North Carolina, he earned his BA in political science from Wake Forest University, his Master of Divinity from the Southeastern Theological Seminary, and his Doctor of Psychology from Baylor University. Dr. Neal preaches and lives a practical spirituality that seeks personal wholeness, relational respect, and social justice. And now let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Hi, I'm Reverend Neal Jones of Main Line Unitarian Church, and it's my pleasure to worship with you this morning. Let's begin our worship with these words. Even in times of social distancing, the stress of uncertainty, and the sorrow of losses great and small, we have choices, especially in how we will be with each other. Will we turn to each other, or will we turn on one another? Or perhaps, worse still, turn away from each other? Let us choose compassion, connection, and community.
Please join me in lighting our chalice. If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me in lighting it. Our chalice is a symbol for Unitarian Universalism, a way to remind us to stay together and fight for justice, for those who cannot fight for themselves, to keep the flame light in our hearts and lives.
The stillness, hold the stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find the silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Seek the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Neal Jones, and I want to invite all of the children to gather around the computer screen for our story for all ages. This morning's story is a true story. It's a true story about a man named Ron McNair. Now, Mr. McNair was born and raised in a little town in South Carolina called Lake City, but Ron grew up to be the second African-American astronaut in U.S. history. And he was a part of that crew of that famous space shuttle Challenger, whom many of you adults know about. So, this morning's story is called Ron's Big Mission. He did something very brave for a little boy back in South Carolina back in 1959. Here's a picture of Ron and his mother at home in the kitchen. "You're up early this morning, Ron. What's the rush?" asked Ms. McNair. "Come and have your breakfast. I made some oatmeal." "I have to go, Mama," said Ron, tying his sneakers. "I have to go do something this morning." "You always have something to do," said his mother with a smile. "Just be home by lunchtime, okay?" Ron was 9 years old, the same age as some of you are. That morning he left his house with a plan. He had been thinking about it for a long time. It was a beautiful South Carolina summer day, and Ron looked up at the blue sky. Someday, he thought, he would be up there flying a plane. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up, but today, Ron had something else on his mind, something very important. Down by the schoolyard, Ron saw his friend Carl shooting baskets. "All right, you made it," said Carl. "Hi, Carl," said Ron. "I wish I could stay, but I've got something important to do." And Ron kept walking. When Ron got to the Lake City Public Library, he stopped. This was it. He was hot from walking so fast, and he was nervous. He took a deep breath, lifted his head high, and went inside. Mrs. Scott, the head librarian, looked up to welcome her first visitor of the day. She smiled as Ron walked in. He was her best customer. Ron gave a little wave to Mrs. Scott and then went right to the shelves. It took Ron a while to find some books. He was always looking for books that showed children who looked like him, but that was hard. There were not many books about black kids on the shelves. At last, Ron found some books on airplanes. He took the books and started to walk to the front desk. Ron felt nervous and his hands felt a little sweaty, but he knew what he wanted to do. Miss Fielding, a white lady who was often at the library, stopped him. "Oh, you can give me the books and I'll check them out for you, Ron," she said gently. "No thanks, Mrs. Fielding," Ron said. "I'm going to do it all by myself." But Ron," she started to say. Ron was already on his way to the front desk. He put the books on the counter. "I'd like to check these out, please," said Ron. The desk clerk didn't look at him. Didn't she hear me?" Ron wondered. Ron knew what he had to do. Now, this was a very brave thing. He jumped up on the counter. He wanted the desk clerk to know he was serious. "I'd like to check out these books, please," he said quietly. At first, the desk clerk and Mrs. Scott just looked at each other. "You know you can't check out books, Ron," said Mrs. Scott. "You can read them here. That's the rule. Only white people can check out books from the library." Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk politely, but he would not budge. "I always read them here. Today, I want to check them out," said Ron. Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk did not know what to do. Ron would not get off the counter. People were staring. Finally, the desk clerk called the Lake City police. This is a familiar story. 2 policemen came over. "Let someone check out the books for you, son," said one of the policemen. "You know the rules." But Ron just shook his head. He would not budge. Now Mrs. Scott called Ron's mother, Mrs. McNair, who came to the library very quickly. "I know how you feel, baby," she said, "but you've got to follow the rules." "I can't, Mama," Ron told her. "It's wrong. The rules are not fair. Why can't I check out books like everyone else?" No one said anything. Not the desk clerk, not Mrs. Scott, not the policeman, not even Ron's mother. Mrs. Scott looked at Ron. She thought about all the times Ron had come into the library and all the times he had sat at the tables for hours, looking over so many books. He was her best customer. and she knew what she had to do. Mrs. Scott walked back into her office and started writing. And Ron was wondering what she was doing. Mrs. Scott returned and handed Ron a library card. His library card. Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and smiled. And as he jumped to the floor, he thought he saw her smile too. "I'd like to check out these books, please," he said, handing the card to the desk clerk. The desk clerk took his library card and stamped the cards in the back of the books. "These are due back in 2 weeks," she said. Ron smiled. "Thank you," he said. He tucked the books under his arm and took his mother's hand, and together they walked home. Ron couldn't wait to get to his room and open to page 1. The end. What a brave young man Ron was. But can you believe that? That at one time, it was against the rules for black children, for black people, to have library cards and to borrow books from the public library. The public library. That means that their taxes help to pay for that building and those books. And yet they were not allowed to check books out. And can you believe that in the public library, they had so few books about black people? Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Throughout our country's history, our country has not treated black people very well at all. They've been mistreated in so many ways. And I'm sad to say that it's still happening. Which is why you've been hearing a lot lately about all the protests that have been occurring all over the country and even all over the world. And they're chanting, "Black Lives Matter." Why are they saying that? It's because for a long time, for hundreds of years in fact, our country has been treating black people as though their lives didn't matter. But I am so proud of all the protesters, black, brown, and white, who've been out on the streets demanding that black people be treated fairly and equally too. You know, here at our church, we have a Black Lives Matter banner out in front of our front door, and we have a Black Lives Matter flag flying from our flagpole with our pride flag. We do that because here at our church, we believe that all people, it doesn't matter what our skin color is or how much money or stuff we have or where we live, that all people have dignity and worth. That's one of the reasons we come to church, to learn that all people have value. All people are valuable, including you. The purpose of this traditional Buddhist meditation, the Metta Sutta, is to help us break down the barriers between ourselves and others by breaking down the barriers within our minds, which are the sources of so much of the divisions and conflicts we experience. So I invite you to sit comfortably now in your seat with your back relatively upright so that you have a sense of poise and dignity. And I invite you to close your eyes and make a slight smile. Focus on your heart. Know that you have an endless supply of compassion. It does not get used up as we share it. In fact, it multiplies. Radiate that compassion out to every part of your body, to the top of your head, to the bottom of your feet. Envelop your entire self with compassion. And say silently to yourself, may I be well. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May no harm come to me. May I abide in well-being. May I be well, happy, and peaceful, just as I wish others to be well, so do others. And now, call to mind a good friend, someone you know well and trust and whose company you enjoy. You are not thinking about your friend, but just picturing him or her. Repeat silently to yourself, may they be well. May they be happy. May they be peaceful. May they abide in well-being, free from anger, free from ill will. May they be well, happy, and peaceful. And now let the thought of that person fade and call to mind someone with whom you are having difficulty. Not someone you hate, but someone who is irritating, someone you find annoying. That person needs compassion too. We have an endless supply of compassion. Share it with them. May they be well. May they be happy. May they be free from anger, free from ill will. May they live harmoniously with others. May this person be well, happy, and peaceful. And now, open your compassion to everyone in the world, to every person in every country, of every culture, language, and religion. Everyone needs compassion. May they be well. May they be happy. May they live in good health. May they not go hungry. May they be free from suffering. May they be free from animosity. May they live in peace. Notice the warmth of compassion radiating from your heart, enveloping your whole being, radiating out to those you know and love, radiating out to those you don't know, radiating out to those who are difficult, to everyone in the world. Feel the compassion of your heart. You have an endless supply of compassion. Now, if you know of someone who needs compassion today, I invite you to say their name out loud. You may open your eyes. And may all those names that were spoken and unspoken find peace and healing this day. Amen. Today's sermon is something of a sequel to my last sermon. If movies can have sequels, why can't sermons? You may remember that last time I talked about empathy and how empathy is almost absent from our public discourse, even in the presence of a pandemic, and even after witnessing the slow motion murder of a man in broad daylight. Yet empathy is precisely what we need if we have any hope at all of pulling together as a country and dealing with the serious challenges we face at this moment. I talked very practically last time about how to cultivate empathy by becoming genuinely curious about another person's life story, by focusing more on commonalities than differences, by listening underneath a person's words to their feelings and values, and by risking sharing your own vulnerabilities when it's safe to do so. No one likes being pushed around. And when we try to push someone to change their minds by pushing our opinions on them, we are essentially pushing them around. And our instinct of being pushed is to push back. Pushing and pushing back basically describes the current state of our public discourse. But when you listen to someone with empathy, when you approach another with kindness, when you treat another with respect, they're much more likely to respond to you in kind, but not necessarily. There are no guarantees in life. Well, except death and taxes, as Will Rogers used to say. We cannot control the behavior of someone else. Sometimes we can barely control our own behavior. But here is the point I want to make today. The behavior of another should not dictate our behavior. our behavior should be predicated on our values. And our supreme value is love. Why love? Because when we are loving, we fulfill life's calling and our deepest yearning. We are most alive. We are at our best. We are mature human beings when we love. People generally respond well to love. Love has the power to transform. We saw the power of love to transform graphically back in 2009 when a man named Elwyn Wilson traveled from Rock Hill, South Carolina to Washington, D.C. to apologize in person to the civil rights warrior, Congressman John Lewis, for something Wilson had done 48 years earlier. Back in 1961, the Freedom Riders stopped in Rock Hill at a bus station. And one of them was a 21-year-old seminary student named John Lewis. Wilson physically attacked Lewis, leaving him lying in a pool of blood. Now, this was not the first or the last time that Wilson would beat civil rights protesters. He later joined the Ku Klux Klan. He didn't even want his own parents buried in a cemetery where African Americans were buried also. But later, Wilson joined a church, and he changed his feelings over time. He was also moved by the nonviolent protest of the civil rights movement, and the inauguration of Barack Obama finally moved him to make his trip to D.C. to apologize to Lewis. Now, Rush Limbaugh has said that the freedom fighters and the other civil rights protesters should have exercised their Second Amendment rights and carried guns with them so that they could have protected themselves. But John Lewis disagrees. Lewis contends that only the power of love, not the power of force, can change a heart. When Wilson died 4 years after his momentous trip to D.C., here is what Lewis had to say, quote, "Elwyn Lewis experienced what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told all of us, that hate is too heavy a burden to bear. He demonstrated the power of love and the effectiveness of nonviolent direct action, not only to fix legislative injustice, but to mend the wounded souls in our society, the soul of the victim as well as the perpetrator. Elwyn Wilson shows us that people can change, and when they put down the mechanisms of division and separation to pick up the tools of reconciliation, they can help build a greater sense of community in our society, even between the most unlikely people. Wilson proves that we are all one people, one family, the human family. And what affects one affects all of us. Love invites us all to change for the better. But we make the choice to love another, not as a strategy to manipulate another, even for the better, but because it's the right thing to do. It's the mature thing to do. Now, as in my last sermon, I hesitate to use the word love because we tend to romanticize and sentimentalize that word. So let me use another word, a favorite term for Buddhists: loving kindness. I like that term because I don't think it has all the emotional mushiness of the word love. We talk about spirituality a lot in church, and in a UU congregation, we probably have as many definitions of spirituality as we have people. But when you get down to brass tacks, I think nearly all definitions of spirituality end up with loving kindness as the goal of our spiritual growth. We aspire to embody loving kindness, whatever the circumstances, because this is what it means to be a spiritually mature person. Now, throughout our lives, some people will like us and some will dislike us. Some will be loyal and faithful, and some will betray us. Some will be transparent and honest with us, and some will be deceitful and lie to us. Some will be kind and compassionate toward us, and some will be insensitive and mean-spirited toward us. Spiritual maturity is learning to accept that one of the givens of life is that life is unfair, and that not everyone, even those who love us and whom we love, will always be loving, loyal, truthful, honest, or caring all the time, including ourselves, not because we're bad, but because we're human. Spiritual maturity is learning to practice loving kindness, whatever the circumstances. Now, I'm using the word practice because the spiritual discipline of loving kindness begins with the intention and effort to respond with loving kindness. Now, hopefully with time, our feelings may embody loving kindness as well, but usually our feelings need time to catch up with our intentions. But you don't have to wait until you feel loving kindness in order to act with loving kindness. When others do not acknowledge us, or they snub, reject, or attack us, it's only natural to feel hurt. And it's only natural to want to express our hurt with retaliation, to punish the person who hurt us, to make them pay, to get even, to make them feel what they made us feel. Retaliation is a perfectly natural impulse of the ego. The ego wants to save face. It cannot stand to be put down. But we do not want to let the impulses of our ego dictate our actions. As spiritually mature people, we want our words and actions to reflect our values. Our most supreme value being loving kindness. When hurt by the ill treatment of others, it is possible to take a deep breath and feel our hurt and anger without allowing our hurt and anger to control us. If we cling to our anger and act out of anger, our anger can easily morph into hatred. And Martin Luther King was right. Hate is too heavy a burden to bear. There is a certain relish that comes with revenge, which is the reason for the phrase sweet revenge. It can feel good to pay someone back and to get even in the moment. But once we come to our senses, or I should say, once we come back to our conscience, we feel regret over having acted that way. Retaliation does not get even. It does not balance things out. It creates a more severe imbalance because it harms the soul of the retaliator. Socrates noticed this peril when he said, it is better to suffer injustice than to commit one. Hate is not in the repertoire of the spiritually mature. I have long thought that the belief in hell is a theology based on hate, in which the impulse to retaliate is projected onto God. When we allow ourselves to be possessed by hatred, we can hate people so badly that we wish they would go to hell. Think about that. I don't know which is more pitiful, the image of people being tortured and tormented for eternity, or the image of someone so consumed by bitterness that they would wish for people to be tortured and tormented for eternity. If there is a God, and if God is love, there is no hell. And there is no hell for people who aspire to loving kindness either. Now, please understand that practicing loving kindness does not mean that you should tolerate, condone, excuse, minimize, or deny verbal, emotional, financial, or physical abuse. Learning the art of loving kindness means learning to extend loving kindness toward yourself as well as to others. And loving yourself means having personal boundaries to protect your safety and integrity. Having personal boundary means you can go this far and no further. I will not allow my integrity, my soul to be trampled. Unconditional love can coexist with conditional involvement. You can both love someone unconditionally while placing limits on your relationship to protect your boundaries. I love you unconditionally, and I love myself enough to take care of myself. You know you have poor boundaries in a relationship when you don't notice how unhappy you are and you settle for just coping and surviving. You know that you have poor boundaries in a relationship when you constantly alter your behavior, plans, or opinions to fit the other's moods or circumstances. In other words, when you live reactively instead of actively. You know that you have poor boundaries in a relationship when you do more and more for less and less. When you just keep waiting and wishing for things to change instead of working together for change. When you keep making excuses and accepting alibis for things you would not tolerate from anyone else. When you constantly do things you inwardly resist. In other words, when you can't say no. When you believe you have no right to privacy. When you are enmeshed in a drama that unfolds beyond your control. When you commit yourself to someone for as long as the other wants you to be committed without having a bottom line. You know you have poor boundaries in a relationship when you're living a life that's not yours. Practicing loving kindness toward yourself means that you have not only the right but the obligation to maintain your personal boundaries. How do you maintain your personal boundaries? I can give you 5 ways. 1, ask directly for what you want. Now, you'll not always get what you want, but the asking declares your identity to others and yourself. Number 2, be a loving parent to yourself. Now, some people who were abused in childhood and had no way of defending themselves did not have the opportunity to learn early on how to have boundaries that are safe and clear. But regardless of the kind of childhood we had, we can always be loving parents to ourselves in the present. And this forms an inner intuitive sense that lets us know when a relationship has become hurtful, abusive, or invasive. Number 3, observe others' behavior toward you, taking it as information more about the other person than you, without getting caught up in their drama. Number 4, have a bottom line, a limit to how many times you allow someone to say no, to lie, disappoint, or betray you before you admit the reality, and work together to change the reality. And if the other person can't or won't change, then be willing to move on. And number 5, trust yourself. If you're feeling hurt, disappointed, neglected, used, or abused, listen to those feelings and trust yourself to be able to receive love and handle hurt, to receive trustworthiness and handle betrayal, to receive intimacy and handle rejection. Loving kindness maintains personal boundaries out of love for oneself and does not give in to the impulse for retaliation when treated unfairly out of love of others. So how does loving kindness respond? It feels hurt and anger without the need to punish or blame. Instead, it uses one's anger to speak up and stand up against wrongdoing. It seeks amends and asks for redress, and it does so with understanding, compassion, respect, a belief that all persons are redeemable, a desire for healing and transformation, and a commitment to reconciliation, if at all possible. The spiritually mature person is not cutthroat and does not believe that all is fair in love and war. The spiritually mature person does not claw their way to the top, but acts with kindness at any rung in the ladder. He or she may have personal ambition, but not at the expense of others or at the expense of one's moral standards. We practice loving kindness because that's the kind of person we want to be. Now, I don't know about you, but I felt so much despair when I saw the video of George Floyd's murder. How many times does this have to happen, I thought, before we realize that racism did not end in the 60s, but is alive and well and lethal still? Not just the brutality of some police officers, but the brutality of an unfair, unjust system of health care, housing, education, criminal justice, voting, wages, and income. How many times does this have to happen before we finally wake up and make some changes? And then my despair sank even deeper when some of the initial protests ended in rioting and looting and burning. I recognized it as the retaliation of rage. You can't keep your knee on people's necks for hundreds of years and not expect a reaction. Martin Luther King understood this when he observed, a riot is the language of the unheard. But then, as the protests persisted, day after day after day, in cities around the nation and the world, my hope began to rise. I have seen black, brown, and white Americans, old and young, by the tens of thousands, with patient persistence, use their hurt and anger to speak up and stand up against wrongdoing. They are seeking amends and asking for redress, and they are doing so with understanding, compassion, respect, a belief that this country is redeemable, a desire for healing and transformation of hearts, policies, and institutions, and a commitment to reconciliation with the American ideal of freedom and justice for all. Something feels different this time. Maybe it was one murder too many. Maybe it's the effect of a pandemic shutdown. Maybe enough people have finally become sick and tired of being sick and tired. Whatever it is, it feels different this time. Justice is what love looks like in public, says Cornel West. I think that what we are witnessing is the practice of loving kindness on a scale we haven't seen since the civil rights days. And I'm feeling hopeful for a change. I'm feeling hopeful for change. Amen.
Take now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in awe. Keep with the word of creation your vow. Giving, receiving, as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to
our stewardship moment. Every month, around the middle of the month, we dedicate 100% of our offering to an entity. Today, we're dedicating our offering to the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence. Please join me in watching this informative video provided to us by Cinda Crane and Mary Oakberg, members of our First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. Thank you to both.
Good morning. My name is Cinda Crane. I'm a member of your Board of Trustees. Marie Oakberg and I are asking for your support for our special collection today for the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence, also known as DAASV. Trigger warning. In a minute, we'll be showing a short video containing the mention of sexual violence, but it does not share specific stories of sexual violence. Now, let's hear from the people of DAASV.
Hello, my name is Alicia Drew, and I'm the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence. The Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence is a nonprofit sexual assault coalition made up of multidisciplinary groups of professionals, including but not limited to sexual assault specialists and service providers, mental health professionals, medical professionals, and systems-based advocates, as well as survivors of sexual violence. The DAASV believes in centering the experiences and perspectives of survivors in all of the work we do in hopes of improving Delaware's response to sexual violence and one day preventing and ending sexual violence in our state.
Hello, my name is Ariana Langford, and I'm the President of the Board of Directors for the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence. You may be wondering, what is a sexual assault coalition? Well, we have four major functions. The first is to build community among service providers by providing technical assistance and training to improve standards of care and intervention throughout the state. Second, we identify gaps in services as well as underserved populations and communities, then strategize to address those gaps. Third, we work in prevention. Our ultimate goal is to end sexual violence. Finally, we provide legislative advocacy, representing survivors, service providers, and best practices in order to help shape public policy.
Why does Delaware need a sexual assault coalition? Each state and territory are provided funding through the Office of Violence Against Women to establish a system to raise awareness and provide information regarding all forms of sexual violence to all populations. This is done through advocacy, training, and education. In the past, the coalition work done was a project of a nonprofit, but in 2019, the advocacy community in Delaware decided our state needs and deserves more, and thus the alliance was created. The community decided that Delaware needed the work that could only be provided by an independent nonprofit organization, and we are well on our way to making a difference in Delaware.
Hello, my name is Jillian Isabel, and I'm an intern at the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence, and I wanted to take the time to explain why we're asking for your support today. In January of 2020, the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence was designated by the federal government as the state's sexual assault coalition, thus guaranteeing us funding for the next grant cycle that begins in September, as long as certain requirements are met. We've been working hard to build up our organization, raise funds, and meet these requirements, while also making sure to create an agency whose culture is inclusive, values diversity, and makes sure our practices are rooted in equity and justice. The final requirement that we need to meet is to hire an executive director and also be able to pay that person until grant funds are available for reimbursement. We are asking for your support today to help us hire an executive director who will in turn bring federal funds to Delaware to address sexual violence in our state.
My name is Melissa Pleasanton, and I'm the chair of the advisory board and the chair of the fundraising subcommittee for the Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence. We're at such an important point in time And we feel at the Alliance that we really have the opportunity to be intentional and to do things right the first time. And we are trying really hard to make sure that we create an effective coalition so that survivors can have things done right by them the first time around, and so that one day people won't be able to say that they're a survivor of sexual violence again. So thank you so much for considering donating to us. The Delaware Alliance Against Sexual Violence is important to me because unfortunately we live in a world where there's a stigma attached to saying that you're a survivor of sexual violence, and that stigma stops people from getting all kinds of help and resources that they need, or causes people to be treated in a way that's harmful to them. And I hope that one day there won't be a stigma attached to having something done to you by someone else.
As you can see on the screen, there are 3 ways that you can give. We appreciate any contribution that you're able to make. Now, here's Marie Oakberg.
Hello, my name is Marie Oakberg, and I'm a longtime member of First Unitarian. We are living in a very stressful time with high unemployment, people staying at home, the schools are closed, summer programs are not running, and it's just a tremendously hard time for all of us. And also at this time, this is all causing an increased need for support for survivors of sexual violence. DAASV will help provide leadership to meet this need. We know it's a hard time for a lot of us, and we just ask that you be as generous as possible. Thank you.
Please join me in dedicating our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love in action. We dedicate our lives, and these are offerings.
Our benediction comes from Leslie Dwight. What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally banded together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather the most important year of all.
Please join in our chalice extinguishing response. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Amen.